Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome again to Kumbukeni. Um, First, let's make the apology. Let's get the apologies out of the way. Sister Nduku is away, and in standing for her is our able contributor, Colin Benjamin. We should get to him. So my name again is Adesoji. I'm reaching you from the belly of the beasts, the mother of all imperialists, the land that gave you the language which we're about to converse in. And I shall extend my hand of comradeship to my brothers across the board, Brother Milton Alimadi.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, comrade. Listeners, sisters and brothers, comrades, welcome to our weekly global university where we use some of the wisdoms from our forefathers, hence the name Kumbukeni, which is Kiswahili for remember or remembrance, to deal with or to confront some of the contemporary challenges that our global African community continues to face. I'm Milton Alimadi, based right here in New York City. Over to you, Comrade Colin Benjamin.
Yes, good afternoon, brothers and sisters. My name is Colin Benjamin. I work as a managing editor with the person you just heard, Mr. Milton Alimadi, Black Star News. I'm also a co-host of the Black Star News show, WBAI 99.5. 3 Tuesdays a month from 3 to 4.
Yes. Thank you very much, brothers. And yes, as you can see me, I'm sweltering. It was 40 degrees yesterday.
Explain to Americans what 40 degrees means, though.
Okay, 40 degrees. 40 degrees is your 104, as I understand it.
Crazy.
So, and funny enough, the topic of our room today is Africa Climate Summit or Green Colonialism.
Yep.
So, to tie in, well, I just told you now it's 40 degrees. I don't know what the temperature is. I'm still sweltering. I'm drinking water like no man's business. Those two things will come into play in the course of our conversation, temperature and water. Well, temperature at 40 degrees, as basic science will tell you, will evaporate any standing water in relatively short time. And with that, what would then happen is those waters will get into the clouds, will sit in the clouds, make the cloud heavy, and eventually will come down, but will not come down as we normally would expect rain to come down because of the wind, the heaviness and everything. You get cyclones, increased typhoon. But also with the drying of the water on the Earth's surface, what you have is adverse temperature, like what I'm experiencing at the moment. The flip side of that is the air quality in itself means animals and human beings alike will suffer. So classic case was a couple of months ago in my brothers in New York will tell me, can readily recount their experience when the fires in Quebec,
Canada,
blew over into largely the west coast of the United States. But it's something that even the East Coast has been experiencing over the course of time with the repeated reports of wildfires in California. So before I bring in my brothers, I want to also say that contrary to expectations or ideas, these weather patterns are not restricted just to the Western Hemisphere. Even down South East Asia, recently, Pakistan experienced one of the worst floods in living memory, where almost the size of the United Kingdom was covered in water for months on end. And still, the torrential rains are still coming. In Australia, residents of Newfoundland, Victoria, South Wales have been warned ahead of time for them to expect out of character weather patterns in 2023. So, which brings me back to continental Africa. In Mozambique, Uganda, Malawi, Madagascar, have experienced some of the worst floods records going on. Even in places like Nigeria, Eastern Nigeria recently experienced torrential rains that spilled over into hitherto areas that waters never got into. So, brothers, with these uncharacteristic weather patterns, what do you think would be the impact on humans vis-a-vis livelihood, farming, displacement, and subsequent reallocation? So I'll start with Brother Milton.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction to this and setting up the conversation, Comrade Adesoji. Basically, what we're looking at is the manifestation of the cost of capitalism, imperialism, right? Where one of the costs historically had been enslavement of human beings, right? African peoples, colonization of African people, other non-European people. And now this is the cost of that type of production system that spread globally, but is still concentrated in the countries that industrialized the earliest: Britain, the United States, Western Europe, and then subsequently Japan, and more recent, the other so-called Asian tigers. And these are, of course, the biggest culprits in terms of global pollution. Of course, the global pollution has been occurring since England was the first country to industrialize.
Yeah.
And now, the same people who are former colonizers, the people who are the contemporary exploitators, are the ones that are also in control of the conversation in terms of the solution that we need to implement. They're saying that Africa, which has abundant land, should now offer what they call carbon credit. They should plant forest plantations. And what will this do? It will allow companies that still produce fossil fuel, like Total Energies, like Shell, to then say we can continue producing fossil fuel while we, quote unquote, buy carbon credits from our African countries, which would then offset the new pollution that we continue to produce. And yet that's how they came up with that crazy term, net zero pollution. We are not adding more pollution, because while in fact we are adding pollution, we are canceling off by paying African countries to plant all these trees, which would then absorb the carbon. And obviously there are many, many holes in this narrative that we can look at. To begin with, there are studies, and this is reported by the Oakland Institute, and I highly recommend people to go to the website of the Oakland Institute. They're based on the West Coast here in the United States. Studies that show that natural forests are capable of absorbing and retaining, capturing carbon 40 times better than these Johnny-come-lately forests that they now want to plant all over African countries, right? Yep. That's number one. Number two, they're not talking about the cost of planting these forests. The cost includes displacing people from the land, and that's why we have all these stories of African governments kicking people off the land to make this land available to plant these forests, meaning people now are losing their farmland, meaning agricultural production is declining. And that's only one of many other reasons. But as you know, a couple of weeks ago, we had the scene of African so-called presidents running to Russia and Ukraine, begging for food, while back home they're kicking farmers off the land. It's just so absurd. And then, of course, these forests are being planted using chemical fertilizers, using toxic pesticides, and then diverting water sources or disrupting water sources, destroying natural biodiversity. It's just mind-boggling. And of course, at the end of the day, unless the formerly enslaved, the formerly exploited, the currently exploited are part of the solution, we're just going in the same circle again, where the people who are creating the problem are also supposed to be the people that are offering the solution. Let me just add one more point, and then we go to Comrade Colin. It's interesting because the Kenyan president, Ruto, he's one of the archangels of capitalism, right? So he, before the conference started, was saying, he wants to make Kenya one of the leading countries that offer investment opportunities for companies looking into carbon credits. And he's a big advocate of this carbon credit trade and a big advocate of natural solutions. Yet look at what he's doing. He's inviting the planting of more forests, but at the same time, he lifted the ban on logging in Kenya. So they're cutting off the natural forest, which has better capacity to absorb and retain carbon, cutting them down at the same time inviting the planting of new ones. It does not get much more absurd. And then one other point. He also lifted the 10-year ban on genetically modified
crops.
He lifted that ban. So you know what that's going to do. It's going to invite Monsanto's monopoly over the seeds, over production, over agriculture. It's going to displace more indigenous Kenyan farmers, displace their seeds. And now we get a better understanding why we see all those young Africans drowning as they cross the Mediterranean. And actually, one more point. We have this crisis of immigrants now in New York City, right? 10,000 arriving every month. The mayor, Eric Adams, said, this is not a New York problem. He's right, but he does not know how big of a problem it is. He does not understand the political economy that is driving people to flee. Formerly, countries that were food sufficient, many of them are now coming from West African countries. Why would somebody take the risk of getting themselves to Brazil and then walking through those forests where I understand as many as 200 people are killed every year to get to Mexico and then come to the United States? You think they don't have anything better to do? Things must be that desperate, and this conversation we're having today is one example of that type of desperation. Over to you, Comrade Colin.
Okay, so Milton hit on a whole heap of topics. I'm going to go back to in Adesoji, in your question you asked basically, what's going to be the outcomes for these kind of actions that are being done. Obviously, with our people and poor people, we have been seeing, over the last several years, what, the changes in climates, the negative effect it's having in different people in the Caribbean, in Africa, and this type of stuff. For me, one of the main things for me now, in particular with this so-called Africa Climate Summit, is the displacement issue, relative also as well to the livelihoods of the people in those areas. I'm also wondering, I'm thinking too about like in recent years, Milton mentioned the Oakland Institute. The Oakland Institute has written numerous things about the ongoing plight of the Maasai people, the forced evictions for the business interests. And one of the things I'm wondering now is, do we know, and you brothers, will know more about this than me, but do we know of the areas that they are now targeting and the people who will now suffer in these areas that they're now potentially going to target, right? To do these. I understand that in the planting of some of these trees, they're looking to bring like pine trees and I think eucalyptus trees, which are not indigenous to Africa, right? So now the question is, for me, one of the main questions anyway, is which particular areas and communities are they now targeting, and how are those people going to be affected in terms of the displacement and in terms of their livelihoods? And I noticed that South Africa, Nigeria, and a couple others apparently decided that they were not going to take part in the whole climate summit. And I'm wondering now if we know, in terms of prominent leaders as well as leaders who are in legitimate organizations that are trying to tackle the climate thing. I'm wondering if we know about the opposition from those.
Okay, it's funny that the word Africa is used for the Africa Climate Summit or the African Climate Summit and the Africa Climate Week.
Right.
But if you notice, everything is centered in Nairobi. Nairobi is not the hub of Africa. I mean, I'm not saying obviously they have their own.
I'm sorry to interject too, brother, but
go on.
As you answer, because as you started saying, I came across this McKinsey and Company and the World Resources Institute that they're saying that they are two of the drivers behind the so-called Africa Summit. Could you also elaborate on that as you
yes. Okay, so the Africa Climate Week and the Africa Climate Summit are almost, they're basically a platform. And the chief driver is William Ruto and another gentleman called Nyaga. And so they've seized on the opportunity that the West is seeking to be outsource their guilt. And so they've positioned themselves in such a way that they would tap into the loose funds from your development fund and your climate change funds, that's to the tune of, at the moment, about 200 million. And so, but they've used a vehicle called Green Resources. Now, for our viewers, Green Resources is actually, when I was doing the research, it's actually a front.
Right.
Not only is it
is this the Norwegian company?
Yeah. Not only is it a front, it is a front for business. No, it is a front for British international investment. And when I went, because the platform, it says it's African Climate Impact Platform, ACIP. FIP, yeah, sorry. Now, if you just do basic Google research and you click on it, it brings you on to the British investment, international investment. Like, that doesn't make sense. Why?
And Norway as well. Norway and Finland are the other two investors.
Yeah, Norfund and Norfund and
Fin
Finfund. Yeah, Norfund and Fund.
And that's
So-
big because, as you know, Norway has the world's biggest
Sovereign
sovereign
National Fund. Yeah.
Yep, $1 trillion.
Dollars. So you begin to wonder, it's like, what is this? This is almost like a front. So you don't want to stop mining in Norway or drilling in Finland, but you want the Africans to bear the brunt of your activities in Africa,
Right.
displacing their people
Yep.
for you.
Yep.
And who do they get to champion? A leader voted by his people. Not only does he champion it,
And we don't even know if he was voted, by the way. Remember, that's why they really wanted him and not Odinga, Raila Odinga.
Exactly.
Yeah, remember 3 weeks before the election, every article in the New York Times referring to the election kept describing Odinga as the socialist candidate.
As a socialist candidate, yes.
But go ahead. Please continue, brother.
So, and he points out to where his loyalty lies in the sense that I think it was in July or June, the dates escapes me now, but in either of those 2 months, it's July actually, July of this year, 2023. He signed away 500,000
acres
of land to commercial farming.
Yep, with the World Bank.
With the World Bank as the cover.
Yep.
Something that is currently trying to be reversed in Zimbabwe and South Africa. You are running towards it. So the more I delved into what could be the possible motivation, I stumbled upon his clearly crafted bio, which says he has interest in real estate, but the last part there struck a chord. It's like he has interest in land.
Yep.
Why would he showcase that? Is he telling his people or he's telling the guys outside?
Both.
And his movement has been one towards them. So you can be rest assured that his loyalties does not lie with his people.
Right. I think him and, of course, many other, once again, every time we have these conversations, we are reminded of many of Walter Rodney's lectures and writings. I think we have now been referencing this particular one almost in every episode, which is in Crisis in the Periphery.
Yes.
Right? Africa and the Caribbean. And that's, of course, on YouTube. And what he said was that many of our problems come back to one thing: who represent the interest of the people in African countries. And there's certainly not these political parties that are by the elite, from the elite, and for the elite. And I think we said the same thing in our last episode, that Rodney acknowledged that he himself was a problem because he's part of the elite. He says we need to step back and allow the working people to create their own parties that they control, that they lead, that they articulate the solutions that they need. We don't have that now. So this is, in essence,
and that particular point is why I was asking before, do we know of who are the legitimate climate organizations and what have they said, and were any of them involved in any way in this?
Okay, that's part of the problem. They don't get the access. They don't get the access to articulate their position, number one. Number two, they don't have the resources yet to mobilize effectively. And of course, that's the next discussion we need to have. And because this is where we bring some value, a couple of months ago, if you recall, in one of our earlier episodes, we brought the Kenyan sister who's
Choma Phillips.
Exactly, the anti-GMO issue. She's in the forefront trying to promote indigenous seeds. These are the kind of people that we need to identify in every African country and link them together so that they can add power and numbers to the issues and the pushback. Colin, you also posed the question, which countries? Uganda is being impacted. Tanzania is being impacted, as Brother Adesoji said. And actually, as you pointed out, the Maasai being kicked off the land. In Uganda, people are being kicked off the land by this initiative.
Including is it Akoli also?
That's different. Yeah, that's been going on for years.
Oh my God,
under dictator Museveni. Basically a campaign of revenge and displacement and massacre and genocide. On the other hand, there's the one that's being financed by AFIP as well, the outfit that Brother Adesoji mentioned, and they're managing companies called New Forest. So what they do is they go to these African countries and they get with these governments, like the one in Uganda, and the government goes and kicks people off their land, and then they build the forest. And in Uganda, if you look at the local newspapers, some of them did a good job in covering. They even have photographs of people whose homes were being burnt by police officers. Police officers in uniform who are supposed to protect the citizen are burning their home to force them to flee.
So that someone can plant some trees.
Can plant some trees.
And this new forest group also, I saw this Mitsui is like
one of the owners. Mitsui company. One of the owners. Two Japanese companies. I think the other one is called Naruba, and they are the number 2 leading managers of forest lands all over the world. Privately managed forest land. $7.3 billion in assets under management. So what they're doing is now they trade carbon credit, right, internationally on the international exchange, on the markets. So now any company like a Shell, a Total can come and say, as I said in the beginning of the show, we are now at net zero because we are buying credits from African country ABCD, right, through New Forest, and therefore we have a clean slate. We bought this much of net credit, carbon credit, which means we can add this amount of pollution as well, and it cancels each other out.
They find a way to monetize everything.
And that's why I like that column from last year that Brother Adesoji shared from The Guardian. And the columnist, what's his name again?
John Monbiot.
He said, anything good and honorable can be polluted and corrupted. And that's exactly what we are discussing today. If you look at it carefully, actually, it's clearly a new form of slavery, right?
Yes.
That now the African leaders are at the forefront. So they can't say this is Western imperialism coming to impose on Africa, right? Because you have the Rutos and company
exactly
who are now promoting this. And they're the partners of what we call green colonialism. Or we could even say the Green Berlin Conference in Africa. Once again, the original Berlin Conference in Germany partitioned Africa. Now you have the Green Berlin Conference in Nairobi, where African leaders are selling off their people. But, Colin, you also mentioned some of the major countries that did not attend. And I think perhaps their position is being heard now because when the conference ended, they came out with a statement which surprised many people, which insisted on increasing global taxation on fossil fuels. If you were just hearing what Ruto was saying in the beginning, you never would have expected that would be the position that would come out. That, of course, is the correct position. But that's the position that is unlikely to be supported by these industrialized countries.
Of course not. Of course.
I mean, and then the other thing of it is to find out that we have oil companies who are, behind these people.
Absolutely.
Right? Just hanging out. And I mean, that it needs to be emphasized to people that the people who are among the main drivers of this thing are somehow behind people who, are supposedly trying to address.
No, I agree. Mitsui and Nomura, both these Japanese companies are connected to the fossil fuel
industries. Yeah.
See?
And also, it is worthy of note that Africa, in the grand scheme of things, contributes only 4% to global green gas emission.
Think about that.
But yet, Africa is supposed to bear the brunt of, not only is it bearing the brunt, but it also has to carry the load
of the solution.
Of the solution.
Yeah, but you're right. We haven't spoken about the brunt of the impact. Now you have the planting season completely disrupted all over Africa. Now farmers cannot plant like they used to do. And this has happened within our lifetime. Imagine, within our lifetime. None of us is 100 years old. So what's going to happen in the next 40, 50 years? Think about that. When we were kids, our parents and their parents could plant properly. This is when we're going to plant. This is when
we're going to harvest.
Yeah. But now they don't know. They don't know what to do.
And that whole GMO thing is dangerous.
The GMO plus the weather patterns now disrupted.
But also I'm thinking as far as the GMO, there's this thing with the GMO where their seeds, if it goes over and contaminates other fields, will kill out whatever that crop is, and their thing grows. And I mean, I remember seeing a crazy story some years ago in Canada about this particular carrier was carrying some GMO stuff, and it basically contaminated this person's field and killed off his stuff. And then on top of that, they apparently were able to then sue the person, saying that the person is growing their product. And then the other thing with the GMO seeds too is like, once upon a time, you plant whatever crop it is, and then you could keep this, you get some of the seeds for the next season. They have these things where the seed is like the one crop, and then you got to go back to them to buy new seeds.
And that's exactly what's happening in African countries, because the source of the seeds are normally the Ministry of Agriculture. So they have a total monopoly. They become the salesperson for the Monsantos of the world, for the GMO seeds.
I mean,
people are really getting it from every angle.
Exactly. I mean, it's the shocking bit is they've now put this marketing facade over it that it sounds so pliable to people.
Green.
Yeah, green, yeah.
When they say green, they mean the dollar
money, the money, right?
Dollar green. We are thinking, environmental green.
Right, the money green, yeah.
And very quickly, let's go back to one point Colin made about the seeds. There was one of the saddest stories I ever read in the Ugandan paper called the Daily Monitor. One entire region bought seeds, the GMO seeds from the government, one planting season. They planted, nothing germinated. Think about that. A whole season, they're waiting. No crops, because the seeds were completely dysfunctional.
Right.
They kept waiting. They kept waiting. The whole planting season went by. Not a single crop.
Nothing.
Think about that. This is the kind of monopoly that they want to impose.
And then of course, if we allow this, they control the food source, and once somebody controlling the food
Absolutely.
source,
Yeah, Sankara
Because
said
only
it.
if you preserve your, indigenous seeds, a little
Yeah.
bit,
Indigenous seeds. Yeah.
you may have enough to grow just to eat and sustain yourself, but not to sell and make a little money, which of course you need to do if you're going to buy, even kerosene, even basics like, things you can't manufacture like sugar, like salt, like anything manufactured,
Mhm.
paying school fees for your kids. Because now, even if you go to clinics now, you have to pay a fee. Nothing is free anymore
Exactly.
because of
You
the
have
World
to,
Bank model.
yeah.
So now you see the implication of destroying their source of sustenance, which begins with the land.
right.
So yes, I want us to take a moment and listen to the words of the environmental minister in cabinet secretary in Kenya when she said it is going to be about resources and capital. Africa will showcase its resources to the world and invite the world to bring its capital to Africa. If indeed, yeah, if indeed we are keen at tackling the climate challenge. Who is so? Question for you, gentlemen, here is three. First is who is we? That's one. And two, showcase which resources to the world, the one they know of or the ones they've not seen. And it is going to be about resources. Has it always not been about
Yeah,
resources?
you're right. You're right. Exactly.
Right. So the answer to we, of course, are the elite of Africa.
Okay,
Right?
we. Okay,
Not the
okay,
working people. So we have the elite part.
okay. Clarity sought, clarity found.
The resources are definitely going to be the land that belongs to the people that are being displaced. And here's the irony in Kenya. Here's the bitter, ugly irony in Kenya. What was the Kenya Land and Freedom Army founded to fight?
The return of the
The
land.
so-called Mau Mau, as the British denigrated them, right? They were fighting to recover the 4 million acres stolen and given to 1,000 Europeans by the colonials. Now you have an African government
Basically,
that
just
is
sign
once
it.
again displacing Africans on the land on behalf of Europe so they can plant forest. When the people were kicked off by the colonials, they planted what? Tea, coffee,
Flowers.
flowers, things you cannot eat, right? Contributing to the food famine in Kenya. Now you have an African president and his colleagues, other so-called African presidents, inviting what you fought Europeans for doing back in the 1950s. It's just amazing how people that say history does not repeat themselves, they're absolutely wrong. They're 100% incorrect. They just come in different clothing.
I mean, to the thing is, I wonder if that minister realized that even the way how you frame the thing and you said that,
It's obnoxious,
right?
right?
Even the way that you frame it, showcasing, it's and also it's you sound just like you're just begging, right? You're begging for for the capital of the West. And so like that kind of stuff shows that, well, when you're framing it like how much how much we're gonna get the wrong end of the knife, so to speak.
Right.
Because once anybody hear that kind of framing, they can tell that you're so greedy for the financing of the West, and so then it gives them a better bargaining position right off of the bat, right off it. So I mean, it's crazy. While Milton was talking to her, I also reflected story, I know it was last year or the year before, in Zimbabwe, of the government leaders them looking to give back people
Yep.
who stole African land. Not just give them back land, but give them money and land
them.
while people are starving in your country. It's I don't know, brothers.
Yep. Instead of saying I will never do this, I would rather not even be president. But there are not so many of them.
I'll be the one to sign them off.
I don't want to be president. I want the interest of the people. That's not there. What is
even more pertinent is the wording. The tree, it says tree plantations.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. They don't see the irony.
I mean, sometimes it's like
right. Yes.
Where does
brother, excuse me, you remind me actually, I think I may have taken the picture. As we continue, I'll search my phone to see, if I can find it. Sometimes I go to the green market on Union Square, 14th Street here.
The real green market.
Yes, the real green market, except one of them, the big truck, the farm truck, they've offloaded their produce. But in the background, I'm reading the name of the farm. Something Plantation. I forgot the first thing, but the second word is Plantation. And they have their logo and everything with Plantation. I'm like, don't people think twice? Come on, man.
You can't.
Obviously, there are no Africans working in the mix in the decision making.
And also not on, but except there were a few actually, Africans or African descendants who were part of the employees who are, selling the produce and offloading some.
Plantation workers.
Yeah, I said, these guys, they probably just need their paycheck. Otherwise, I was going to go and start provoking. I was going to say, brothers, come on, man, and point.
Sure.
But I said, no, let me just go by to Barnes & Noble.
I want to say one thing here that, I know that it's so much off topic, but it gets back to this whole thing of like how, dependent we are and how much, we clamoring for financing from foreign things. So like with the BRICS thing, the thing that was stunning to me is to see that they're basically inviting countries like Saudi Arabia, Argentina, and then with Saudi Arabia in particular, with the recent stories of firing and or refugees and this type of stuff. And I'm saying,
the massacre.
Did South Africa really go
hundreds? They've killed hundreds of Ethiopians.
Right. And I'm wondering, did South Africa and like even Brazil too, I would expect, are you just co-signing like to bring in? Man,
again,
just because we're looking for some benefits from them, maybe.
Saudi Arabia, they want the capital, they want the financing, and I agree with you. Are they trading ethics and morals for Saudi blood money? I guess they're saying that perhaps as a way to counter the United States, Western Europe, and NATO. Maybe they will hold their nose and bring in a petrodollar state like Saudi Arabia.
But to me, Saudi Arabia for me is like, no, man.
Because Saudi also, mind you, they're going through their issues as well. They have issues with the United States now. So if BRICS can say Saudi, but BRICS, I think that at some point, BRICS should be able to exert some
influence,
opinion and influence on the Saudi politics. We can't have you as a part of our club while your anti-Black, anti-Africa, attitude is manifesting against the massacres of Ethiopians. Ethiopia, which by the way, is the other invited new member.
So
Right.
You know,
Yes,
so you're inviting Ethiopia, you're also inviting the country that is.
so it's like fancy meeting you here again.
Yeah.
Amazing. But you also said another important word, Colin, our dependency.
Yes.
And that is the way to analyze a lot of these things. If we analyze it as a structure and a model, it makes it easier to understand the things that are going on. Back again to the same lecture, Crisis in the Periphery. Rodney says the issue is we're struggling to change our, and he uses the word, location in the global system as dependent, number one, and two, marginalized part of the global system. So when we start seeing ourselves, oh, Jamaica, Uganda, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, that's when you get confused. Those names are meaningless. You know, he sees us as a uniform,
Right.
spread out, but located in a marginalized and dependent position relative to the center.
And the periphery, right.
Comes from, where financing comes from, so that you see the uniformity in the type of relationship they have with us. And then everything else we do is just a different manifestation of the same thing. How do we keep selling off our people, and for what price, and who benefits from selling off our people? So what we are seeing in Nairobi is just another example of selling off our people, and it comes in different kind of, you know, characteristics.
Speaking
you
of,
see, this is why too. I think that this is why I appreciated what the Ghana president said during the so-called Africa U.S. summit, where he used the opportunity to then strategize and put out a call to people in the diaspora, because I thought it also enhances what is, you know, it's an initiative with potential, but we know that they're going to try to destroy, you know, the Africa CARICOM initiative that started a couple of years ago, because, you know, and that is something I really do think we should pay attention to and try to let our people know that, because, you know, while we're there trying to depend on these Western countries, we're not doing enough to deal with depending on one another, right? You know, so that's why I think that Africa CARICOM thing could be a game changer, but we know that there are going to be forces
to some
that
extent
are going to be trying to undermine it.
To some extent, and here's my issue with all these, you know, I call them potential opportunities. At the end of the day, it is still the elite of Africa and the elite of the Caribbean trying to come up with the solutions with no input from the vast majority who are the working people.
Exactly.
So our challenge is, do we create structures where in every one of the institutions that exist, you have representation of the farmers, do still, and the workers in the countries that you have, you know, some production in urban areas going on? Or do we intentionally, in every constitution, have a requirement that working people's parties be created? You see, in every one of these countries, and authentic ones. Not you create the parties, then the leaders become the elite as well.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
you have to be a quote unquote small farmer, right? You come up with all these conditions, you know, because at the end of the day, if we don't empower them, right, and their voices are not articulated in these meetings between African leaders and Caribbean leaders, or even in progressive countries, you know, like the current, you know, Brazil, who knows how long it lasts, you know. You have this, Bolsonaro hovering in the background.
Right.
Trying 2.2.
But at the end of the day, we don't empower the vast majority of people. We have fictitious governments in African countries. That's why it's so easy to get rid of them. Which, by the way, brings me to the other irony. The Green Berlin Conference is occurring in Nairobi, while at the same time in West Africa, we see the youth forcing the military to start removing these governments that are beholden to Western
interests.
So we have these two opposite dynamics happening at the same time. And at some point, obviously, there's going to be a clash.
Yes, which brings me to
of selling off Africa and the forces of, hopefully, the forces of African renewal.
Which brings me to an important position by Kwame Nkrumah in his book, Class Struggle in Africa, where he makes mention of the fact that the farther the masses are away from the elites, the gulf obviously will be filled by the capitalists, the imperialists, and what have you. So the situation is, will the people agree to their leaders being effectively in the pockets of these people? Clearly, as Brother Milton just explained, that won't be the case, because based on what is going on in West Africa, you can clearly see that there is this position, there is this pull now to say, listen, you have to center the interest of Africans. We're not against the investments, but this sort of this sort of exploitation,
right,
masquerading itself as investment, is not going to be it.
No, I agree totally.
And go on.
The young people in Kenya are watching. They understand what's going on in West Africa. Young people in Tanzania, in Uganda, in Mozambique, in South Africa, right, where global capital still solidly in control of the economy and the leadership. Young people are watching because, of social media. So nowadays you can, and who knows, maybe it's one of the reasons why they ultimately came up with that statement at the end of the conference, which of course they still highlighted, the fact that so-called investors pledged $23 billion to this green carbon thing. But I think it was very significant that statement calling for taxation of global fossil fuels came out. So clearly there were other forces at work also, where at the end of the day, their voices were heard.
But then when we're talking numbers, the G7 countries did agree to, I don't like using the word because Judge Monbion says we should advise carbon offset the global carbon footprint by pledging 100 billion for 5 years from 2020 to 2025. Suffice to say that they've not met any of their targets.
Okay, very good. In fact, that was what I was going to ask you. Anybody can pledge anything. Right.
That's right.
Listen, it's not realistic that they will fulfill, because first of all, as has been pointed so many times, if they were to tax, even at a very modest rate, the money that is currently hidden in tax shelters around the world, the trillions of dollars, just a modest tax on that money would be enough to finance all global development plans in the countries that are not yet industrialized, or low-income countries. So the fact that they're willing not to even do that, why should they even realistically entertain new taxes? So they just come. You can say, you can pledge anything, so long as there are no consequences. If, on the other hand, you pledge something and it would automatically translate into a form of taxation, that's something else. But new taxation would have to be approved by the legislature.
True.
In all those countries. Do you see the United States Congress financing something like that?
Right.
Absolutely zero.
Highly unlikely.
But I want to go back real quick to something, because I agree with Milton that we can't just expect the leaders them without people from the masses pushing. I think that there are some leaders that actually do want pushing from the masses. But in a couple of things that Milton said, and we know that, okay, the youth element is crucial. So like my question now for you brothers is, what kind of initiatives now do we need to do to further empower the youths of Africa, right? To push, to give that push that we know we're going to need, because those other forces they keep pushing.
I like that question. And my answer would be to help sponsor and promote an Africa Youth Conference, Continental Africa Youth Conference. Just pick the ideal country, location, and I'm sure you can mobilize even from the millions and millions of disaffected Africans all over the world who would support even on crowdfunding platforms to sponsor such a thing, so that accommodations can be covered, even transport for some of the key youth leaders can be covered, the location for the conference. Obviously, you need an ideal country which is willing to accept the inevitable, which is that the youth must be empowered in African countries. Remember when Houphouët Boigny was leader of Cote d'Ivoire, when Sankara asked if he could come to visit.
Yeah, you can, but you're not speaking to no.
Exactly. You can come, provided you don't address the youth. Can you imagine? President telling another leader that
you can come, but you're not talking to the youth.
Which means at the back of their mind, they know the power of the youth, which is not surprising, given the fact that more than 60% of the population of the African continent under the age of 25.
25, yeah.
So that just says it all.
But so now, Milton, let me ask you. So maybe you should write up something, and maybe we target Mia Motley, or some other.
Oh, no, I'm not kidding. I'm very serious responding to your question. When I say we should help mobilize, sponsor, I absolutely 100% mean it. I think one of our upcoming shows, we should identify 3 or 4 of the leading youth leaders in different regions, have at least one from each region, and let's get them on our platform to initiate that conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
How did change happen in Africa during decolonization? It began primarily with that conference in where was it? Birmingham?
Manchester.
Right.
Manchester, yeah.
Yeah, the Pan-African Conference, the 5th Pan-African Conference.
Yeah.
In Manchester, in the UK.
So again, what we're doing here is part of the conversation, is to engender that sort of notion in your mind that, listen, someone has done it before. And like Nkrumah always say, the struggle, yes, we've done the struggle up to a point, but then your freedom is not guaranteed if you don't continue to nurture it. So you have to continue to nurture said freedoms. Thomas,
we need to encourage them to read the people that you're just naming right now.
Yes.
We always emphasize, that's why we keep talking about Nkrumah's book, Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. We keep talking about Sankara's book, Thomas Sankara Speaks. Check out that job. I'm reading Black Africa once again. It is so brilliant. You read
it was written in the 70s.
Like, in the 70s. It's like you're eating good food. That's how good it is.
Speaking of good books, White Malice is also one that helps you to understand what gives you in context, as in you can understand how money comes into your politics.
I agree.
Without seeing exactly.
George.
Yeah. A brilliant book by Dr. Susan Williams.
Susan Williams, right?
Yeah.
I confused her with Susan George, who's the other economist in France.
Exactly.
My bad.
So I mean, that book, White Malice, if you want to give anybody a Christmas present, I would. In fact,
I second that. I second that notion.
No.
Even though it's 600 pages, you won't feel it. You won't feel it. One of the only 600-page book that I didn't want to put down. You know?
Yes, of course. I mean, I first of all, I started with listening to it. Then I'm like, nah, this is not doing it for me. I need a physical copy. Because I have to follow it line by line, So I've got the Audible and I also got the physical copy. And the physical copy is all marked up. Anybody that knows me knows once I get into my books, I basically own them. And so to come back to what we're talking about with regards to quote unquote information, it's important that we know what is the impact of climate change on Africa. People will hear climate change.
Right.
Can you gentlemen talk to some of the impacts so far that springs to your mind?
Well, I think we've mentioned a few already.
Mm-hmm.
Which of course is the same, the displacement of people, from the land, the disruption of the agricultural production. Nobody knows what the season is anymore. As a farmer, if you don't know what the season is anymore, why are you going to clear large size land, plant large size crop production when you're not assured that the planting season is right? So now you plant a little bit, but at the same time, you're now forced to do something else to earn income. And that is why we're seeing the collapse in agricultural production, really. Because in these countries, they don't have programs that would offer them insurance, right? If you plant, if you have a crop failure, the government is still going to cut you a check. That's not going to happen. But probably these investors who come to African countries, right? I call them so-called investors, because the impact is so negative to the Africans, right? These normally they have investment insurance guarantees, right? The World Bank has programs that guarantee some of these investors. The U.S. government has a program, I think it's called OPIC, that guarantees parts of this investment, if not all of it. So everybody is getting a backup plan. You, the small farmer, you have no backup plan. You spend so many hours, labor time, clearing the land, planting, and then you wait and you pray to your African ancestors that you're going to have
a bumper harvest.
You can't have that. That's one of the most devastating impact. And then, of course, the other more salient ones, which are only salient in theory, but has their actual real impact, are the destruction of the ecological system. Because planting these massive forests, it takes a toll on the land as well. You're exhausting or diverting the water sources. You are using so much chemical fertilizer, pesticides, So those to me are some of the, the worst devastating costs.
Okay. I mean, I can add this into the mix. And in research, I found out that almost 250,000 people in Africa would face water scarcity by 2025.
Think about that.
2 years.
Not 2035, 2025. 2 years.
2 years from now, right?
Yeah.
Which is so ironic because we have like the world's most abundant, potential water supplies, but just we don't have the mechanism to get it to where it's most needed, like irrigation systems. So why are they not investing in that? Irrigation systems to bring water to the locales where people need. You know, we have the largest bodies of natural water, right?
Yep. Running through
Why aren't we investing in? I hear, is it Djibouti? I think just recently invested in a major wind farm. Why aren't we doing that? Wind farm. Why aren't we doing solar energy farms? Right? Why aren't we doing more electricity and efficient mass communication, rather than just allowing people to import, cars, automobiles, right? We're not practicing any of these solutions
at all.
I went to a conference of the Bobby Wine's party, National Unity Platform, in the Netherlands last year. And I was so amazed by the number of people riding bicycles, man. All over the place. I understand even government officials, ministers, ride their bikes to work. And yet you have the African elite, they won't even entertain that.
Mercedes-Benz.
Riding their bike Sankara style, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up, which Sankara did when he was a minister, actually. And then, of course, once he became president, he
downsized the car.
All those big cars. He forced ministers to share cars, right? So you could have 4 ministers sitting in a little car. Why not? Can you imagine if all the ministers were doing that? Which reminds me, in fact, there's an interesting article in a Ugandan paper called The Observer. One of the best articles I've seen in any of the local Ugandan papers recently, which was showing the number of staffers who work for dictator Museveni at the State House. It's just amazing. He has
with all their Mercedes Benz and
126 drivers alone. Think about
100 and what?
26 drivers, right? This is for dictator Museveni.
Attached to the entire government parastatal, or just his office?
Just for him. This is in his state house, This is part of the state house staff. He has 40 private secretaries, 40. He has, I just got the article in front of me now, 80 gardeners working on his garden, right? No, I made a mistake. The number of drivers is not 126. It's 129 drivers. He has 50 people who are cleaners. He has 35 cooks. You don't even have that in the White House here. He has 12 chefs, right? He has 400 vehicles for his office. He has
400 vehicles.
400 cars, right? He has 996 employees in the State House. He has 59 waitresses. And he has 14 room attendants. And this is paid by the people from taxation and from diverted so-called foreign aid money. This, to me, was one of the best articles a local paper has ever done in Uganda, because now everybody's riled up against this. In fact, I tweeted myself, folding my laundry at the laundromat. And I said, I do my own laundry. And then I posted the image of the front page of the Ugandan paper that's broken down with images,
Oh my God.
Stuff. It's amazing.
No, I mean,
I want every African country to do a similar story, right?
Yes, yeah.
So you've got that amount of people away from walking the land or growing. Question is, would the people prefer to do that as opposed to be on the land?
They would like everybody, most people I know would like to be self-sustaining. And the problem is, one of the things that this guy has done in Uganda is destroyed self-sustaining entities, because dependent people are easier to govern.
Right.
So Uganda had one of the most impressive cooperative system, co-ops, in all of Africa. You have agricultural co-ops, They had their own banks, agricultural banks, financing their own projects, run by the members of the co-ops. They're the officers of their organizations. So it destroyed all of that. Just basically banned all of that. So that people can be dependent on the state, because co-ops would control their seeds, they would control the agricultural production, they would plan and have their own vision, right? But he wants everybody to be dependent on the state so you can manipulate that. Because that's how you're able to bring in a Monsanto,
right,
and just have the Ministry of Agriculture providing the Monsanto seeds, instead of the co-ops each having their own indigenous seeds, It's just amazing.
Which brings me to a very beautiful segue there, which brings me to this fact, which is that 86 million Africans could be forced to leave their homes by 2050. That is about the population of the United Kingdom and change.
No, it's just terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible. I mean, and you see, have you ever seen the African Union have a conference to address the issue of Africans drowning in the Mediterranean?
right,
Not yet.
They can't,
right,
because the problem are the so-called leaders in these African countries. So it would be like you're condemning them. And then they would have to come and make the conference. Obviously, they would blame the young people, right? I know the guy in Uganda. I know General Museveni would say, "Oh, you see, the youth are lazy." That's what he would say, right? A lazy person willing to
Go and kill himself.
Or be eaten by sharks,
right.
in the
Or being shot in Saudi Arabia,
or being auctioned
in
Libya,
right?
And many of them are victims of sexual violence, and increasingly many of them are women as well.
True.
Well, I think I might have mentioned on one of these Kumbukeni thing. I know I did on our Black Star BAI show that last year I got basically a threat letter from a social media company that I won't name, but they were upset because I posted a story about an update in Libya, but they were upset by two pictures in particular. One where a brother had a gun to his head. The other was a picture of about 5 or 6 of our sisters being chained together.
Yeah.
Right. But they were more upset about the picture, not about the reality.
That you're giving a bad image.
Yeah.
And that, my friends, is the Libya created by your friends, Hillary Clinton, NATO,
Sarkozy,
former President Obama, and of course Sarkozy.
And you're leaving out my prime minister.
Yes,
David Cameron.
Exactly, your prime minister as well.
So now question: the painful fallout of the African Climate Summit, or possibly the African Climate Week, is the fact that position they got to at the end will be presented as a common front,
right?
An African common front in Dubai,
right?
So how do we counter that?
Well, actually, one of the good things is that one of the positions is going to be the increase in in fossil fuel
tax,
which of course is what we should push. I think we should definitely have a few conversations on this platform, maybe 2 or 3, even before the climate. And that will give us an opportunity to identify some of the activists that Colin mentioned. We should search for some of the most prominent activists and give them an opportunity. We have this platform, we have WBI as well.
Yes,
so bring them on WBI as well and have them amplify their voices. And if some of them
have that conversation.
Because obviously, in most cases, they have no resources. If we can even mobilize resources to get them airfare, provided, of course, they can get visas, right?
Yeah, that's another element.
To go to Dubai, stay there, whether they are able to
get accreditation or not,
even if they need to stand outside some location, protest, and just be creative in trying.
And also a strategy a campaign strategy to show the disinformation, to also show the real funders who are behind it, so people
Exactly.
really know.
We mentioned, like the
Yeah,
Japanese
so people really know that, people like the McKinsey and company and their horrible record and the world resources.
I like this. I think we can be proactive. We can even create a couple of petition campaigns.
Yeah.
To mobilize people. So I think that's a good.
And sometimes, if you know your people well, just create an infograph.
Exactly.
So infographs, tell you what a book will tell you. It will basically lay down the foundation, but obviously using pictures.
That's why I really like this thing. You can't see it clearly, but it has, his head.
Exactly.
And then it has the breakdown in images,
That's the infograph. That's the infograph for you. Yeah, that's the power of infograph.
Presidential expenses, and look at Museveni's budget.
Right.
And then,
see
the images, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
You can. So that's the power of infograph for you. It hits the nail on the head,
Yes.
So that people are not lost in the source. You look at, whoa, really? That happened? Yes, it did.
Right.
And
I like the fact that even as we speak, I see some of our supporters posting. Karen says, if organizing on the local level and educating ordinary people on the issues, the key to moving them forward. How can this be done on a large scale in African countries, and how can we contribute to that? See, that's the kind of, mobilization we need, because these issues affect all of us. So once we come back, we'll come back in our future podcast with some concrete ideas, definitely.
Yes. And also, CS once says, and this was in respect to the point I raised earlier, that they did promise they were going to fund the impact of climate change in Africa to the tune of 100 million for 5 years.
Really?
And she retorts, and she says before that they had committed the same 100 billion a year in 2009.
See?
Today, what is still
waiting.
As I said, if there's no enforcement mechanism, it's easy for them to just come up with any numbers, right?
Of course, because they know consequences. Also, the media likes buzzwords. Give them something they can chew on. Give them a number.
I want to go back to the youth thing again, because we absolutely have to get creative and to do everything we can to give youths more voice. Now, brothers, I'm wondering, Milton talked a while ago about how the youth in the Sahel region are pushing in recent months pushing these militaries to get these people who've been there 30, 40 years and stuff. Do you see similar type of youth upheaval, let's say, closer to, let's say, Kenya, where we have people like Ruto doing this type of stuff, looking to sell us out?
Okay, let me answer it this way. Ruto was one of the earliest to condemn the coups d'etat that are ongoing, including the most recent one in Gabon.
Yeah.
Right? So they're not oblivious. So if
the possibilities
are not oblivious, it means they know that the population is also not oblivious. And that would
they have to be seen to be proactive.
Yeah.
And
because again, I think we definitely need to identify the youth leaders, as you say, and reach out and platform them, and give them as much push, so we could keep the pressure on these people.
I would also add that all of them are aware, especially Ruto,
right,
being the way he came to power. There was protests. And more recently, there was protests with regards to the cost of living crisis in Kenya.
Correct.
How far he's willing to push out the boat in order to welcome capital?
Yes. It's going
to determine how the youth react.
Yes, I think that's a very good response.
Yeah, it's going to determine how, because the leaders sort of know what the temperature is. They know how far they can push their population. Think of the likes of the guy in Uganda.
Yes.
You notice the moment everybody started talking about going for the African summit in Russia, he quickly jumped on board.
Yes.
Because he knew the youth are watching.
Absolutely.
You can't be seen to be so pro-West to the point where your people then say, oh, okay, this guy is expendable.
Right.
And you're only as good as your last speech, as we found out, So with Ruto is it safe to call him a plant? Excuse the pun.
Right.
Because he's decided, capital is going to decide what runs in Kenya.
Right.
And he is unapologetic about it.
And a very wealthy capitalist at that.
Yes. So he's so unapologetic to the point where he doesn't even see whatever he's doing as, impeding the progress of his people.
Right.
To him, it's just normal.
So once again, brothers, the power of images, right?
Mm-hmm.
And talking about the youth, this is what's happening in Uganda, which is right next door to Kenya, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Bobby Wine, who, of course, we know many of us believe he won the 2021 election that was stolen by Museveni.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's having a national tour. Been going around the country. And at his events, tens of thousands of people are showing up. I don't know if my screen can show. Tens of thousands of people at his events.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the guy in Uganda is seeing this. This is one image from the event, So Museveni is seeing this. Ruto is seeing this. And the other leadership in the region are seeing this. Because if this is emblematic of the young people in Uganda, then right across the border, those artificial lines, right, dividing these countries, the young people are feeling the same way, probably.
See, one of the reasons why, we pretty much know that, Bobby Wine did win. One of the reasons why I wanted to see him seated is because in my mind, I was looking at what him being seated as a president would do for the youths, not just in Uganda but of Africa. Being that he came out of that entertainment space. So who knows? Maybe what Bobby Wine do might inspire some other people in the creative space who have masses of youth behind them.
Right.
Right.
And,
say,
and
hey,
young artists are doing that, by the way, in Senegal as well. So I'm glad you brought that issue. They're doing it in Senegal. They're doing it in Democratic Republic of the Congo. The youth at the forefront, particularly the artists, because artists know how to disseminate the information in an engaging way,
right?
That will bring young people. So I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, that is ongoing.
And I mean, that's why too we need to keep pushing Bobby Wine too, because I think, when is supposed to be the next election in Uganda, Milton?
2026.
2026. Bobby Wine is going to run again, right?
Correct. Oh, he has no choice.
He has no choice.
Turnout during this tour that he went through, Okay.
He has no choice. He's been placed on notice.
Right. And
with the reception.
The guy is trying to promote his son. So his son, right, recently was driving through Museveni's son, who's a general also, not surprising. He was driving through some towns, right? And he was waving, and there were nobody on the streets, man.
Who's he waving to?
Imaginary, supporters.
So maybe what needs to happen too is going up toward, I don't know, a year before that, some kind of massive campaign thing to get the word out about Bobby Wine and what was done to him before,
And of course, the people who sustain Museveni, not only Museveni, but there's Musevenis, around Africa. And I think we can start by looking at the countries that get the most World Bank resources.
Mm-hmm.
Those are most likely the most anti-people, rulers in African countries as well. So those are the countries who could, target for campaigns to support young people in those countries.
I don't want us to leave without me mentioning this. Kwame Nkrumah, in his book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, says we should view any so-called developmental aid that comes to Africa as one of the latest strings of neocolonialism.
Mm-hmm.
So is it safe to assume that this so-called planting of trees or green carbon offsetting is another form of colonialism?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
So, question then would be, how do we then put it to our people that we've seen this play before? We should not fall for the banana in the tailpipe, to use an American expression.
Yep, I think we need creative ways of communicating. In fact, some of them we've discussed today. The graphics thing,
right?
Yeah,
graphics, the images. I think we need to create youth leadership contacts.
Yes,
in every
absolutely.
region. That's the number one thing we can do. In Uganda, we have, already through Bobby Wine's parties, we need to identify some in Ghana, in Nigeria.
Yep.
There are some prominent ones in Ivory Coast already. We need to engage with them. Zimbabwe, South Africa, and start bringing them to our conversations on
Yes.
And WBI as well.
Yes. I think actually,
absolutely.
Now that Africa is sort of centered of the conversation, a world conversation, be it coups, be it, we need to actually be much more prominent. I have been seeing in the last couple of days across my timeline, certain people discussing African issues, and you can immediately see that they have no clue what they're talking about. They're almost like reading, the old quintessential script on Africa. Oh, they need this, they need that, rather than, centering the people as we do here, or centering their cause. So if I then go and check on, say, okay, who is behind this? And then you find the big boys are actually behind them.
Right.
Right.
So what you now have is the new voice, actually the old voice, but using a new funnel. So where you have the capitalists using the likes of Ruto, you also have the capitalists using, I don't want to mention their names on here, but I mean, if you go on YouTube alone, you see the kind of threads, you see the kind of conversation they're having. You're beginning to know, okay, this is not quite revolutionary. This is more reactionary.
Right. And there are media outlets that echo the standard narrative. Look at the headline, New York Times. At Africa's first climate summit, a clear call to the world. Invest in us. That's the headline. Invest in us. That's a clear call to the world. Right? And the article articulates exactly what we've been saying. Heads of state from across Africa concluded an inaugural climate summit on Wednesday in Nairobi, Kenya's capital, by issuing a declaration that called for an urgent restructuring of the way wealthier nations engage with the continent. The declaration stressed numerous times that rather than being a helpless victim, Africa was primed for leadership on clean energy and environmental stewardship. But to make that happen, the statement said, the world's industrialized countries, which are largely responsible for the pollution that is causing climate change, must first unlock access to their wealth through investments instead of relegating their contributions to aid when disasters struck. This lack of financing is one of the biggest issues dividing rich and poor nations as the world struggles to slash carbon dioxide emissions. It will be one of the main points of contention at the United Nations Global Climate Summit starting November 30 in Dubai. The historic gathering in Nairobi was partly an effort by poor nations to amplify their argument. At the event, investors announced what amounted to around 23 billion that would go toward projects including solar microgrids, carbon markets, and reforestation. So you see, when you read this without knowledge of some of the things we've been discussing, this looks very good.
Yeah, exactly.
Very promising. But then you don't realize that the problem is the issue of carbon markets and reforestation. Because it's even us, had we not done the research and become up to date, we would say it's very good. It's very good.
It sounds plausible.
But today we discuss the downside of reforestation and the downside of carbon markets, where Total Energy or Shell can say, oh, I bought carbon credit. Now I can pollute so long as I don't pollute in excess of the credit I bought. See?
So let me make this point here, right? It's we as you brothers always do, we should always encourage our people to investigate and read as much as they could on these things. However, we know, and this is not a recent phenomenon, we know that a large masses of our people a lot of the times are getting their information elsewhere. So one of the things is we're gonna have to be creative. So like, we've been also talking about youth empowerment and stuff like this. Some of these new tools that the youth more gravitate to, right? Where we need to start now figuring out, and when I say this, when I say new tools, I mean like stuff like TikTok, these type of stuff. We now need to figure out now how we could use those things in a way where we can give them bite-sized stuff of the essential things as a starting point, right? To really get them engaged and get them informed on these type of things, right? And I think this is the other thing that when we start networking with some of these leaders, we're now going to have to pick their brands as to, okay, how could we use these tools now to, like, say, do a TikTok video that's going to get millions of views and,
I agree. I can't even add to that. I agree 100% with what you said.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. Before we go, I would also like to remind our guests we're currently on 801 subscribers, so please help share, like, subscribe some more, so that we can get to the 1,000 mark, and hopefully, begin to do more excitable things on this channel.
Yes.
Gentlemen, your final words.
Well, I am glad that this conference actually allowed me to inform myself a little better than I was informed. And now I'm actually been encouraged and motivated to get much on top of this new green colonialism that is ongoing in Africa. So I think we chose a good topic. I think the conference allowed us to choose this topic. So to our listeners, we will get more youth involved and engaged, more youth from the continent. And as Adesoji said, I echo that sentiment. Please support us. Tell us your friends about us so we can get more subscribers and we can get people to support our Patreon page as well. Thank you.
I co-sign everything that was just said, and the only other thing I'm going to add to it is that the main answer to our problems is always going to be from within, not
Yes.
without. So
Absolutely.
On that note, I would leave you with the words of Thomas Sankara, who said, imperialists are the arsonists of our forest. For them to call for reforestation, they've burnt something. So,
Yes.
Gentlemen,
Well put.
ladies, good evening. And from us till next time, it's good evening from me, or as they will say in Yoruba, Odibakono.
Well,